the offside line.
This is not soccer. Is that clear?
Utmost danger. Danger could be there. It's a try. A magnificent try for the 21-year-old.
Brilliant. Oh, that's brilliant.
This episode of the Offside Line Pod is brought to you by Village Health and Wellness Clubs Edinburgh. Get summer ready and enjoy a club stacked with premium kit, a brand new box and burn studio for the ultimate combat style workout, plus spanking new bikes in the group cycling studio, all ready for action. Gym, swim, throw shapes, or get your chill on for just £50 per month. Summer's coming. Get ready to dig out those short shorts. More details at village-hotels.com/workout-at-village. And we'll put the link in our show notes. So this looks like it might be the final pod for the season, and we have got some very special guests with us today. Barney and I are joined once again by the great Mark Palmer from The Times and photographer extraordinaire Craig Watson. Right, lads, we're nearly there, crawling over the line, nearly at the end of the season. We've got this summer tour and the Lions tour ahead of us, but there's a bit of a break, so take a deep breath before we're plunging in again. How are we all feeling? You guys were in Dublin at the weekend. How did that all go?
Well, I think we determined that we made somewhat of a strategic error. Like the previous time in the Champions Cup game between Leinster and Glasgow, we decided not to bow to Dublin's horrific hotel prices and just plough through till the first flight back. And that was fine for an 8 o'clock kickoff in the European game because we only finished up at the Aviva probably about midnight and only had a couple of hours to kill. Whereas an afternoon game, there was an awful long time between that and our 7 a.m. departures back to Scotland. So somewhat beleaguered troops by the time we got back to the airport. So I think next time we may have to find a dorm room somewhere. And the rugby wasn't anything to write home about as well. So
no, I was going to say there's plenty of time to kind of ponder the game at that stage.
Yes.
What your kind of takeaways from it, other than it being yet another disappointment in Dublin.
Yeah, it was kind of, we've seen this movie a million times before. Leinster came out strong, battered Glasgow up front, and didn't look like sort of loosening that grip for the whole game. And I thought the scoreline massively flattered Glasgow in the end with those kind of 2 late tries, giving them a bit of kind of gloss. But they were, I think over recent weeks, that kind of Stormers game aside, where they were actually really good, the massive injury list has caught up with them, particularly up front. They've kind of ripped that. They've had this sort of ball carrying heft ripped out of that pack. Xander's just a massive absence. I don't think it's possible to overstate that one. The drop off is so stark, and that's where Leinster went after them and got so much joy. And yeah, I just it didn't feel at any point that Glasgow were going to seriously compete, never mind win the game.
Mm-hmm. I did feel sorry for poor Finn Richardson up against 2 Lions in the front row who are scrummaging against him, and he's got another Lion in behind them, and you just think they're just obviously targeting the young boy, and they took him to pieces in the set piece. And then the power game, that was it. Like, they had that one great try from Jamie Osborne, but again that was off a scrum turnover, but the rest of it was just pretty simple power game play, and that's all they have to do when they play Scottish teams, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the lesson. Although we probably should have learned the lesson before that. That's the lesson from the season when you think of Scotland versus Ireland. Although that's not the first time it's happened. Glasgow's games against Leinster, like rugby. We talk about blueprints. There's a whole lot of jargon and theory and philosophy and strategy comes into rugby, but ultimately, if you can't beat them up front, or if you get beaten up front, then it's long days at the office, and I think that's a big concern for Scottish rugby going forward, because I know Gregor likes to say we've got a pack that can hold its own. The reality is we're holding on. We're not holding our own. We're holding on there. I think just to be cheery.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts?
No, I think that's right. I think after 3 minutes in or something, Leinster scored, and it was just this immediate sense of dread of what could really be a bad day. And I think if it wasn't for George Horn coming, or Glasgow coming right back up the field pretty quickly and scoring, then at that point you think, oh well, maybe, and then it just reverts back to type. Yeah. There's definitely some strange psychological thing about going to the Viva for Scottish teams, because they just fail to turn up time and time again.
What was that stat you had, Palmer? That there's not been a Scottish win there in...
Yeah, since it was reopened as the Aviva in 2010, there's no Scottish team, be that international men's or women's or club team. Both Edinburgh and Glasgow have played there. None of them have won a single game. Glasgow have won in Dublin in that time, but at the RDS. But as Craig says, just nothing at the Aviva. And on that evidence, it's the same recipe every time. So if we've not come up with the answer so far, it's you would worry about going back there on Paddy's weekend next year as well.
I mean, just that site alone. I mean, even when it was Lansdowne Road, the last win for a Scotland team must have been like 1998. 98, yeah.
Because the win,
Jesus, the win, horrendous.
Yeah, because the win was at Croke Park because they were rebuilding the Aviva.
1998, bloody hell.
Yeah. And did you check, is the football team, I'm sure there's a bit of chat in the press room beforehand and you were trying to work out if the football team had won. Maybe it's just, Scotland are destined. It's a graveyard for Scottish sport. Did you work that one out, Palmer?
I didn't actually in the end, because they've definitely been cuffed there. I remember, but I don't know if they've also picked up positive results. But it just kind of felt, as ever, Leinster are a much better team. Ireland, when they're on it, are a much better team than Scotland, and when those things play out, then maybe we shouldn't be too surprised.
Well, that's exactly the conclusion that I drew rewatching the game this morning, and I was like, they're just a better team. There's nothing.
I think the frustration is that yes, Ireland and Leinster are better teams, but we turn up every year and do exactly the same thing, and it expects something to be different. We understand that they're a better team, but we're never going to beat them if we keep playing the exact same way. That was, I don't know, 20, 25 minutes into that game on Saturday, stuck behind the dead ball line with everything happening in our own half. And I just thought, we're playing this game in exactly the wrong places. It didn't take much for the ball to be turned over for Leinster to score because they were so close to their own try line. We were playing, it just felt to me that we're playing the game in exactly the wrong places.
Just jumping ahead to this, the chat we're going to have about Scotland and Gregor, is that it kind of shows again that for all the chat around the Six Nations, that maybe it was Franco's time to come in. He does not have the answers either that Gregor is lacking when he plays an Irish team. Like, he has not come up with a formula to beat the Irish teams in the same way consistently. Obviously, they've had better results against the other three provinces, but essentially Leinster are Ireland, and no Scottish coach has come up with a way to handle that.
I think that's a very fair point, Pete. And the thinking was they were trying to do something different when they played the sort of twin playmakers and Adam there to kind of give them that kicking game, but even that didn't come off at all either. Just nothing fired. As Craig says, playing in the wrong areas, also overplaying in the wrong areas. I thought when they did get a bit of kind of possession in the sort of middle third, they were trying to force it, and balls were going down. Not helped by some individual players probably having their poorest ever games in the Glasgow shirt, guys that normally shine. Not to pick on poor George Horn, but I think he definitely fell into that category. I've never seen him play as poorly, but. Yeah, ultimately it just kind of all led to the usual conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Scott Cummings as well in defence, like normally very, very good. And that first Dan Sheehan try off on his good right shoulder, and he just kind of went straight through him.
Yeah.
But it was like similar, like overplaying. That's what happened in the annihilation in the Champions Cup.
Yeah,
they just played in the bizarre areas of the field.
Yeah, they looked knackered. Like there was a bit during there was a long passage of play during the second half. I think it was Josh Mackay and the kind of break, and I saw Scott Cummings trying to chase the game, and it looked like he was. What was the line that he was dragging a sledge of? It was like a 10-ton sledge behind him, and it wasn't just him, and he just looked knackered. And I suppose. That's what comes down to, Ireland, they're smart, they're strong, they're physical, they're fit. They've got it all. And, so it's even more, it's even more exposed there because, I suspect that's why you end up playing in the wrong areas of the parks. You're so harassed and you've got no answers. You've got, I think it comes back to physicality. I think you look at the Irish team, they're just big, strong men. And we've got
gain line. I remember turning to you during the game, but it wasn't even a move that led to a try, but it's just literally every carry makes meters. They're over that gain line time and time again. Where Scottish teams, Glasgow, were kind of stopped on or behind it every time. There's no momentum.
Yeah, and that takes it out of you. The thing I was like, observation from being there, Mark and Craig, I'm sure will agree. It was flat. It was really flat at the Aviva, which. I mean, I don't know what it says about Irish rugby, maybe it says something about how they see Glasgow. It's just like it wasn't an occasion, and probably I can understand why. There wasn't really much. I don't think there was really much trepidation or mystery about what was going to happen there. But it was.
At this point, when the defending champions come in a semi-final, you think it should be more than that. But they'd obviously had the same issue the week before with the Scarlets, and there's obviously some kind of disillusion maybe with the team or.
I've spoken to a few friends over in Ireland, and they say it's a Dublin thing. It's not just a Leinster thing. Even the Ireland games at the Aviva recently, they've been kind of struggling to get an atmosphere that sometimes they're obviously selling bigger numbers for the Ireland game. I think they've been struggling to sell Leinster tickets the last few weeks. But even when the Aviva's packed out for the Ireland games, they're still struggling to get an atmosphere. That a lot of it is possibly down to that success. The prices of the tickets have gone up, and it's becoming very corporate because that's the only folk that can afford to buy these tickets now. So it's not your dyed-in-the-wool Ireland fans that are going to sing their lungs out for 80 minutes. It's full of front sandwich brigade that they're paid a fortune for their seats and are just going to sit and watch what's happening in front of them.
I actually think maybe you're touching on the success side of things though, actually, because it's like going to watch games in New Zealand. The crowds do not get up for it because the expectation is that their team is going to win. So they kind of sit back and just watch and analyse the game. They don't get fully into it in terms of like blood and thunder and screaming your team on because they don't need to because their team are going to win more often than not.
Must be nice,
because what's that feel like?
Did you not see slag off the Old Firm in Scotland about that? Because unless it was an Old Firm match, then they would all be leaving 20 minutes to go because it was. Maybe we shouldn't get into the Old Firm as a rugby podcast, but I think it's what happens when teams are dominant, isn't it? Yeah.
Man City as well. Same. Just to touch on that as well. Like same thing when they're absolutely dominating the league, and you're not gonna. They don't hang around or they don't come to the games because the expectation is they're going to win. Yeah. So you don't.
But it's a concern. It's a concern for the Pro or URC, sorry, because I mean Leinster is your biggest marketable thing, presumably, and and it's just it ties into a whole lot of stuff we talk about pro rugby and the game and where it's going now. Is it more and more corporate? Is it more and more made for TV? And the kind of the real kind of fan experience is secondary. And where does it end up? Yeah,
I thought Leinster, though the atmosphere was flat, Leinster as a club obviously starting to recognise that, because if you look at that kind of 5 minutes pre-match where they've got the flames going off and they've got guys chasing mascots around the pitch and McCarthy and all that sort of stuff, that there's obviously a small bit of recognition that they need to do something to try and get the crowd up for it. And maybe rugby as a whole has to do a bit more to deserve that crowd, to deserve that atmosphere.
It was a hell of a tackle he put on the mascot. McCarthy put on the mascot.
With your contacts in the press over there, so I, for my sins, read quite a lot of Irish newspapers, and yet, maybe I'm missing it. Maybe there's a difference, but there just seems to be absolutely zero access ever to any of the players. Certainly from this side of the water, that where UK journalists don't get any access to the players, and it seems to be, from what I read, you get very little access over there too. So if you're not able to engage audiences with personalities, that's also going to have an effect, surely, on pulling fans. It's a real rarity for guys to come out as they have, as McCarthy coming out and saying, people love to hate Leinster, and we want this title, and it was a big thing for us to beat the champions and all that kind of stuff. But that's personality that you just never hear from them ever. That is a factor. I mean, what do you reckon? You guys know a lot of guys over there.
I think Mark's about to say exactly the same as I was about to say, so you can say it first, Mark.
No, I was going to say, I think that is a very fair point. And, speaking to the guys on the ground there, that they do, journalists moan about access all over the place, and we're no exception. But it does seem to be, particularly pronounced there. And then, but again, it's maybe more understandable or more easy to get away with if you're doing that and you've got winning teams on the pitch. When in our experience, particularly when there's a lack of access and a lack of success, and it's an even more kind of toxic problem. So I think they're better primed to kind of get away with lack of access, for want of a better expression.
Yeah, I don't think their access is any worse than ours, for example.
I mean, I don't think it's any worse or any better. It's just both probably nowhere near where it needs to be.
I think rugby as a whole's got a danger of eating itself recently in terms of access across the board. And I think, if you look at the Prem in England as well, obviously they've lost a couple of clubs recently to go, just disappearing and all that sort of stuff. That I think for years maybe marketing teams and things have taken it for granted that they can get away with lack of access and lack of fan engagement and lack of this. You see some teams, you see the Bath home games and things like that. They have a crowd of the fans welcoming the team in. The team walks down this kind of tunnel of fans and all that sort of stuff, and there's a brass band and drums and playing, and it's very almost kind of like a French atmosphere. And then there's other teams that just don't seem to put in any effort in, and then suddenly they wonder why they can't sell those £100 tickets or those £50 tickets.
You talk about access, but we do get some. We've had guests on the pod who are current players, like BBC Sport have had them on. You think of Ryan Wilson's show, they get players on that are current players and they're playing in Scotland, be it Scotland, Wales or England, but you just don't get them in Ireland. They're not appearing on podcasts. And again, like reading lots of newspapers, I listen to a lot of Irish podcasts, and they're not getting current players on as guests. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I wasn't really aware of that. I hadn't really kind of registered that at all.
And that was a problem with the Netflix series as well. Ireland didn't want to let them in.
Yeah. I mean, the Netflix experience, that was a dud, complete. I mean, it was, to me, that sums up, it was a point I was about to make on the back of what Craig said, and I think there's a bit of an issue, because rugby more so than football, for example, is that the unions are very, very prominent in terms of, like, they host game, obviously it's the SFA and the FA, host England, and, but it's completely different, but the unions are very prominent. You think of Edinburgh, they ultimately control all of that, and so there's a difference between access and good access. So, like, there's one thing. And there seems to be, if you look at what the clubs do in England, or Bath certainly, it's access, and it's also about engaging people and trying to sell it. And really, whereas I feel like with the unions, it's box ticking. It's, we've got to put you up and put you up. But like, the best case scenario here is this guy says nothing interesting and we get away with it and we move on. And, so I think there's got to, I think that's, I'm not sure about your thing about, Irish guys not, like the amount of access they get, but I think in both cases, the access can be just very stilted or very, they're not really, it's not really about selling the game. It's just about, it's corporate and it's a governing body doing what it's meant to do, but not really thinking, how do we make this really exciting? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. I mean, let's touch on that. One of the things we're going to talk about this week, just to go back over something we discussed last week, which is the R360. What are your thoughts, you guys, on that? And even if it doesn't come to pass, the impact that might have on just getting the wheels in motion for the entertainment side of the sport and doing exactly this, opening up access to people so we can get the personalities and see a bit more razzmatazz. Exactly as you were saying, Craig, about the kind of player walk-in for Bath is completely new and reworking, and it's much more glitzy and pulls the fan, but whilst also pulling the fans in closer to the whole experience. What are you guys kind of thinking about that in R360?
I think, like anything, when there's a vacuum created by lack of access from clubs and things like that, some of these corporate guys, see a gap in the market to make something a bit glitzy and a bit glamorous. To make these, what is it they describe as a Super Bowl event where they're having pop concerts and music festivals and things like that as part of a weekend of rugby. For me, though, I don't think something new like that works when you're just starting 8 male franchises and 4 female franchises from scratch, because then how do you get buy-in? I think they're probably going to come up with some good ideas that if URC and Prem and Top 14 wants to steal some of these ideas to make things better and to boost the fan experience, then maybe that side of it's a good thing. But part of me wonders whether it's a wee bit like the English clubs who moaned 10, 12 years ago about the Heineken Cup because they want a bigger slice of the pie, and then everything changes to the Champions Cup and the English clubs fall away and it becomes a bit of a disaster. I think if you look at some of the URC games, and especially if you look at the top 14, I think anyone that looks at the top 14 wouldn't think that fan engagement needs to be improved across European rugby. I think it's maybe some English guys that are a wee bit blinkered, that they're not looking across the channel and seeing how engaged clubs can be with their own fans. And suddenly they want to just rip it up and start again.
Yeah, it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, ultimately, the crucial thing is the rugby. You can't forget the rugby. So, I think that's probably what you're getting at, Pete, is the best case scenario from my point of view is you look at that and go, crikey, we need to up our game a wee bit. We can pick up this and we can add a bit of that in. But it's got to be about the rugby, because if you just want a showbiz event, then just do a showbiz event. Get Oasis in at Murrayfield like they have done and host away. You wouldn't want. I've kind of lost my way with that bit a bit, but I think it's just. Let's take the let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we talked on. Sorry, Mark. Just it'd be like watching the Barbarians against the French Barbarians. Like, probably quite entertaining, but it's not something you're desperate to tune into and watch.
Not every week, not week on week on week. Yeah.
So I think, Barney, you're already seeing a knock-on effect of that. Talking about just kind of almost putting a bit of pressure on the existing structures, existing leagues and unions to up their game. The Club World Cup, to me, is quite a queer attempt to sort of head off at the pass. It's like when they try to bring the Super League in football, and suddenly you've got a Club World Cup there as well. Actually, we're going to do this ourselves. But for me, I just don't. I still fail to really understand how it would fit into the ecosystem. And maybe it's not designed to fit into. It's maybe designed to squash the ecosystem. But to me, it just they're saying that the club game, the existing sort of professional club game, continues to exist underneath it. But surely it just eats itself, because how on earth are you asking existing club owners and unions to keep investing in that tier to produce players when they just then bugger off and play for one of the franchises? Because the guys that are naturally going to attract at the moment to the franchises are going to be guys coming towards the end, existing big names who are looking for a payday, and quite rightly. But I don't then see where the pathway into it comes from. And again, there's still so many things which are completely unknown about where the money's coming from, how guaranteed it is, all the rest of it. We're told it's all fine and it's all set up and that players are flocking to it, but show me the evidence.
There's a big difference saying to a guy, we'll give you £2 million or £1 million to play for us. Are you up for it? Do you want to sign this? Do you want to sign this non-binding, heads of agreement? And then you say, well, we've got that guy on board, because no man in his right mind is going to, turn that down as long as it's non-binding. So the proof will be in the pudding. But I think, go back to what you said, I think the test should be with any of these things. It's the same LFV golf. What's the main goal here? Is it to make money or is it to grow the sport? And I think this is to make money. There's nothing there about growing the sport. Okay. Now, the two things aren't mutually exclusive, but this is to make money.
One of the things I've heard them kind of trying to fob it off with as well is this kind of idea of player welfare. Oh, there's too many games at the moment, and now you're going to produce a league where, you're playing a couple of games over a weekend on a Saturday and a Sunday, and then on a Sunday night you're piling onto a plane and flying halfway across the world. And I would imagine cattle class, because you're not going to get 300 players in business class on a charter flight across the Atlantic so that they can play a game in Vegas or, blah, blah, blah. I think you're suddenly then into the realms of, well, where's the player welfare there when you're cramming all these guys in and they're only getting 5 days rest between games and things like that. It just, there's too many questions for me at the moment.
Yeah, and the idea that it's not going to affect the international game is insane, because Ireland, England and New Zealand don't pick players not playing domestically. France don't have a policy, but they don't pick anyone outside of France because they don't need to, but they probably would have a policy if this came in. And it says it doesn't clash with rugby, but one of the blocks is right during the rugby championship.
Yeah.
So, it's wild. And now it's funny, I was listening to the Good and the Bad and the Rugby this week, and Mike Tyndall is conspicuously absent from being on it, and they didn't mention it at all this week. No.
And then they've been kind of, because I listen to it sometimes, but they've been positive before,
They have had moments where once a season or two, they'll come up with like a plan to fix the game. And it's basically that. It's like Mike Tyndall's come up with a plan, and he's managed to speak to enough wealthy individuals who, but if any of it's actually serious or not, who knows?
The thing is, as well, though, is we keep hearing that there's all these wealthy individuals waiting on the wings to invest in this new game. Why aren't they investing in the game now? What's wrong with the product? Surely if these Saudis and F1 teams and, all the American teams that we keep hearing are so keen on investing in rugby and all this sort of stuff, why are teams like Worcester and London Irish going bust without any of these big investors stepping in and going, "Oh, I'll buy a team for buttons and I'll grow something." It's.
I mean, the argument you'd make, which is a bullshit argument, is that rugby's run so badly at the moment that we would put our money into that. But if we could come in and run it, which is what they said, which is the case they made with the Champions Cup or the Heineken Cup, and it clearly wasn't the case, because I don't think anyone would say the Heineken Cup has got the same cachet as it did 10, 15 years ago. But that's the argument that says, why should we put money into it? You guys are rubbish at running a sport, which is absolute nonsense, because these people haven't run a sport. They've maybe run successful businesses. You can say what you want about the unions, but the unions have run a success. The sport still exists, so they've had some success over 100 odd years through various different economic cycles, from the game going amateur to professional. They've got things wrong, but they've run a sport and they're still running a sport. And so there's this arrogance, we can't trust you to do it for us, and it's crap.
There must be something in it though, because CVC were meant to be this new frontier for the game, coming in with all this commercial expertise from other sports. And they have there's been zero change. There's not even, like, the number one thing they were going to sort was the broadcasting.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's more fragmented than ever.
It's even more fragmented, exactly.
Yeah.
Barney's point is so key about the core product, because it has to matter. These games have to matter. I just don't see how these games would matter to your existing rugby audience, never mind a new one. We've seen it so often with the conversations we have around Wales and the fact that their audiences haven't bought into cross-border competition that isn't England, and even when the URC bring in these South African powerhouses, which I think have done a great job of lifting levels on and off the pitch, but there was resistance to that as well, because they're not traditional rivalries, they're not things that people are used to being invested in. So I just don't see where franchise A against franchise B with a random collection of players playing in a random venue, it doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't have a hook, So, but
I think one of the other strange things is you were saying, like, franchise A against franchise B is, they're then talking about taking it to non-rugby markets. Let's go to Vegas, let's go to New York, let's go to Sao Paulo in Brazil, and playing in front of 300 folk or something, because you've not got an existing rugby market there. So, who's going along to watch these games? Are they expecting, the Lions type fans to follow their favourite players around the world to these sporting events the way they used to do with Sevens and things like that? It just seems crazy to me.
If it can have that, function of shaking things up a bit, and maybe getting rid of some of the the arrogance and sort of laissez-faire attitude that can exist in rugby officialdom, actually making sure that people are looking to the future and being proactive about how we grow this thing, great. But I don't think this, as presented, is the silver bullet in any way, shape or form.
No. It's like that weird Tournament 12s that they came up with a couple of years ago, and it was backed by guys like Steve Hansen and Eddie Jones, and they had all these big names behind it. And it was such a stupid idea.
Yeah.
Such a stupid idea.
Yeah. Money does that to people.
Yeah, but part of rugby's problem is it's still, essentially run by stuffy old white guys at the top of the tree that don't want anything to change, and they've never wanted anything to change for the last 50 years. Because I think one of the good examples was that, everyone said, "Oh, look, Drive to Survive's done for F1 and Netflix and all this, so let's get a Netflix show." And then they put a Netflix show on, and everyone, it's exactly 100%. It's half-assed. We don't give the access out. We don't build these, player profiles the way they do with the golf one as well. And then we wonder why after 2 seasons it dies in its arse. It's like, you've got to invest in it. You've got to look at the way other sports market themselves and go, what is it they're doing right? Why are they making 10 times as much money as us? Or could it be access? Could it be player profiles? Could it be sponsors? Of course it is. So we can't keep being insular and then expect things to change.
It's still extraordinary that they've never managed in rugby to replicate the success of Living with Lions. And I remember speaking to those guys for the book I did on that tour, and what was even crazier was, after the huge success of that film, they were not asked to go on tour in 2001, and they've never been asked since, and which is just extraordinary. But also the format, and when I spoke to them, they said, we never wanted anyone to do a talking head, and we never wanted anyone to do a direct-to-camera interview. You just and you don't have an introduction or anything. You just let it film, and then we'll piece it together.
Yeah.
And why they've not done that? Why can't they just embed a cameraman, like one of the staff, even all season? And
Control, isn't it? There's so much of it.
but and if you have an unsuccessful season, if you have like a middling season, then you don't release it. But it's probably not cost you that much to do it that way. And if you have a disaster season, like, Welcome to Sunderland, then that is great viewing as well. And then obviously that story where they've come back now is incredible. But those first 3 seasons of as they just dropped a league was just extraordinary TV. And that started the Welcome to Wrexham. That inspired that one. And but the point being, why are they not just opening up access? You don't have to do video analysis or go tactics. It's the personalities and just seeing actually what a grind the season is, and the highs and lows and the injuries and all these kind of things, and the human stories behind it all.
I'm going to slightly disagree with you, Craig, because I don't think it's like World Rugby or the people running rugby don't want to have change, but they just want change. And I think there's a lack of personality, a lack of sense of humour about themselves. And it sounds like fairly trivial to talk about sense of humour when you're talking about how do you make a billion pound business work. But rugby's never been able to it's always wanted to put on this, and maybe it's because it's a niche, a secondary sport compared to football, and doesn't have the same sort of self-confidence. But it's never wanted to kind of bare its soul. Is things like
Feast at times,
like that. Living with the Lions broke, was the exception that proved the rule. But since then, it's don't show the weaknesses. Don't show the heartache. It's all. And I just think there's stuff like that all the time. We hear about stories about photos being, certain agencies not allowed to put photos out of the people getting red cards because that's not the image we want to portray of the game. That's all part of it. It's that's fairly minor, but it's all over. I think that's part of the problem. World Rugby, I think it wants to modernise, but they're too stuck in, trying to keep control and trying to kind of look like they're the big serious guys, and they're greedy as well. That doesn't help as well. If you think about what's going on with the Sevens, they got greedy. The Sevens was onto a good thing, and then they thought we'll take it in house and run it better, and made a big
100%.
Make a big zero of it. But it's just rugby needs to kind of just. It's the highs and the lows. That's what sport is. It's the highs and the lows, and let's enjoy both of it, because the highs are better when you've experienced the lows, instead of keeping everybody at arm's length and giving them a sanitized version of reality.
Chill out and not take itself so seriously at times. It's isn't it?
It's a game, isn't it? It's like a children's game played by adults, and we all get buy into it. But it's
wise. That's how you sell it to new audiences. Not by being kind of po-faced and preaching about rugby values.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But if you think about all the good things of that Living with the Lions thing from '97, the moments that are nearly 30 years later that we're all still talking about, I bet 90% of the unions would go, if that was done now, they would go, oh God, we can't have that out. You can't put that in the documentary.
Absolutely.
If they had the control, the reason that worked, that's what the fans want to see, but that's not what the unions want to let out.
Yeah, you can see it. Doddy Weir, when he's mistaken identity. I mean, they wouldn't be allowed in that room. We're not going to do a thing. We're not going to do crisis things like that. The suggestion that Doddy might be out drinking, cut that, get that out.
Mm-hmm. Will Grimwood nearly dying on film, and it's all there.
Yeah.
And the devastation of Rob Howley's injury. And Doddy's as well, and it's all captured. Now it'd be like, no, that's a private moment for him.
It would be, yeah.
But that's what makes an incredible documentary, and that's the whole point of doing it.
100%.
Talking about tours, then, lads, the Scotland squad got announced for Fiji and New Zealand. Great to see George Turner back in, as Barney and I have touched on when we were discussing our Lions picks before the squad was announced. Not only was he a massive loss during the Six Nations in the autumn, George Turner, but if he'd been around, I think it's almost certain that he would have been a Lion this summer. How good he is and how important he is for the Scotland team.
Yeah, but is that the only reason he's on the tour? Because, do we need 80-year-old George Turner to go on the Scotland tour in the summer? That's all he can do.
Who ruffled your feathers this morning, Watson? Who ruffled your feathers?
I just wonder, we know what George Turner can do. We know what Grant Gilchrist can do. We know what George Horn can do.
Yeah.
I question the logic in sending some of these guys on
Yeah. I mean, I
a
think
summer
that,
tour, apart from being really
Close.
close to Australia just in case something happens. You know what I mean?
well, I think there's something in that. You know, I think there's definitely something that.
I think they probably all volunteered to go. You know, if you
Yeah.
had a choice, do you
Yeah.
want to go on tour or not? It's like I will go on
Yeah.
tour.
No,
to
Gregor
be-
said-
and
yeah.
a 3-hour flight away.
That'll be more interesting when it comes to the test teams in terms of, are these guys actually playing, or are they, just there and training to be close to Australia? Because
Nah, I think they'll play if they're there. I think they'll play.
And I think
Um,
it's good to have a framework of some kind of experience. 'Cause I think maybe last year they were able to go with, what was it, 12 new caps when they were playing. Let's face it,
Chile and
you would like to think that we would give them a good go, some of these teams, but just the four of us as well. But they're playing a better level of opposition here. Gregor made the point about ranking points counting for more this year because of World Cup draw. And the last thing we want is another 2023. I've got no issue with them actually having a spine of experience there alongside some of these newer guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's Fiji. Look, Gregor's first tour lost in Fiji. They got beaten Fiji. So, he'd end up with egg on his face if he just sent them. I mean, that was one of the debates or the questions that before the tour was, or before the squad was announced, was how many, how much, what was the balance going to be between the experienced old heads and, new faces. And I think we're all probably slightly surprised that he said himself he's picked pretty close to his full team. I think the two that he name checked were the two second rows, Sam Skinner and Johnny Gray, who he just said, experienced guys. They've had injury issues this year. They just need to and I can see especially when you've got young guys coming through. I mean, I think Alex Samuel's really unlucky to miss out, but you've got Max Williamson, who's missed a lot the second half of the season, so he needs to play. They've taken Gilco. I take your point, Craig, that maybe Gilco, we don't need to learn anything about Gilco, but they've taken him. Who's the other second row they've taken? Cameron
Henderson, yeah.
Who's another guy.
You've got guys like Ewan Ferry, Alex Samuel, Jack Mann, all missing out in that tour, which, from my point of view, I thought that would have been an absolute shoo-in for these sort of guys to go and learn. Maybe they could go as well as the Gilcos, as you say, and learn from these guys. If we're not limited to set numbers, but you just wonder why, even guys like Big Jarry and things like that, it's like, would a summer tour of Scotland been of benefit to these guys?
I suppose that's, and as you know, I'm always happy to kind of complain about player pathways and how many players there are and stuff. I suppose, that's, it's a sign that we have got more strength in certain positions. I wouldn't say in all positions. I mean, you look at the front row, look at tight end prop. Like, how many people can you take, Craig? When they could fly 50 people out and not leave anyone at home, but then that's counterproductive.
I think it's a good point, Barners, because I think we've probably complained previously about it almost being too easy to get a Scotland cap in certain positions in this era, that you play half a dozen good games for your club and you're in. So, maybe being forced to wait a little bit longer is no bad thing in certain cases. I agree. I thought Ewan Ferry was the one I was really surprised at, because he's been going really well for Glasgow in a number of positions, and I thought between him, Jack Mann, and Magnus as well, who really just don't like the look of, for his face doesn't fit. There would be an opportunity there, but by and large, I think I quite like the look of it, to be honest.
Someone else whose face doesn't fit, Johnny Matthews, is he injured, or because there wasn't much chat about that?
No,
Was
I played
there?
at the weekend.
Yeah.
No, but how old is he? I struggled to get too excited about the Johnny Matthews thing not getting selected. I mean, I take the point.
He was in form at the time throughout the season, and he wasn't. His
Yeah.
exclusion from the Six Nations was odd.
Yeah, there's a lot of good. Yeah, I see it as just a selection call, and I don't. I'm not sure there's any great conspiracy there. He just rates other guys rates other guys better. But
interesting that he put Freddie Douglas back in the under-20s. Saying it's good to get game time, whether it's good for him or it's also good for the other guys coming through in the under-20s, of which there are several real prospects coming up through there. So just having him around and strengthening that experience, especially in the pack for those guys, I think is maybe actually more to the point than him getting game time for that in that tournament.
But both. I mean, if you look, I think they've got two in each position in the Scotland squad, and they've got 2.5 or 2/3 at back row. In terms of back row, you've got 3 back row places, and I think they've taken 8 back rows. So how much game time's available for those guys on a 3-match tour? I think Freddie Douglas made a huge difference when he came back into the Scotland under-20s. Huge, and they're up against it, and they need to they don't need to win any of those games again. They're playing England, South Africa, and Australia, or Australia and South Africa in their pool matches in this World Championship. First time back into the two. They don't need to win any of them, but they need to beat Spain. I think it will be Spain to avoid relegation, and they just can't afford to get relegation. It makes a lot of sense to me that Freddie Douglas is playing at that level. Although the flip side of that is, not this season, but the season before, Freddie Douglas and Henry Pollock were the two open sides when Scotland played England. There was a lot of chat at the time about Freddie Douglas had outplayed this kid, Henry Pollock, got the better of him. And I know everybody's career goes at different paces, and Freddie's had a few injuries, but you do kind of look at it and go, bloody hell, Freddie's back in the under-20s. He's had a couple of games for Edinburgh, a cap against Portugal, and look what's happened to Henry Pollock. And we were thinking about this podcast because we were going to talk about breakthrough players. I'm showing my hand here. There's nothing there's nothing up here like Henry Pollock, because I just think we don't give our guys a chance to go. And if things had been different, then you would say, well, it's crazy for Freddie playing under 20s, but it's not that crazy because he's never had a chance to really kick on like Henry Pollock had. If that makes sense.
And it's been a few years since we've had a young 20-year-old or 18-year-old, 19-year-old coming through straight into the pro teams and straight into the national team. Your Jamie Dobies and your Matt Figersons and all these sort of guys. It's been a few years since we've had a real kind of youngster that's sniffing about the national team. It says a lot about the pathway.
Yeah. How do we think the tour's going to go then, lads?
I'm going to be a total Sappuccino again. I don't see, like, Gregor's talking about, World Cup points and things like that. We're playing Fiji and Samoa and, the Maori All Blacks. It seems bizarre. If we don't win all three, then Gregor should maybe stay there.
Stay Fiji.
I think it's going to be harder than. I think it's going to be quite hard.
Yeah.
Fiji game is definitely going to be tough, but he's got to make the decision of he's either taking easy games that he wants to win to boost his World Cup points, or you get some glamorous against New Zealand, against South Africa, against.
Well, we don't really
but I suppose they knew that we're going to be missing a large chunk of our best players because they're going to be with the Lions.
Yeah, we don't get a say with that. We get that's.
I think that's a we say, because when Gregor spoke recently, he said that it was his choice to do a development tour last year, and it was again take the Maoris this year as well. So
So 3 easy wins. I think Fiji is. I mean, I think the other two. I'd be disappointed if they were under any real pressure there. Fiji, I just look back, we've lost games in Fiji before. It's a tough place to go. They'll be massively up for it. I think Scotland should be strong enough to do it. So I will go for 3 wins, but I think it'll be a wee bit squeaky bum against Fiji. Yeah,
I would absolutely carbon copy what Barney said there, having been in Suva for Gregor's first tour. I mean, that, the week prior to that, they'd produced one of the best, probably one of the best performances of his entire era, beating the Wallabies in Sydney. And went there to Suva. Everything fell apart. It was a torrential downpours all day. Guys were in danger of drowning at the bottom of rucks. A dose of the liquid stuff had gone through the team in the days before the game. Everything went wrong that could possibly have done. And up against a team that, as you say, are baying for blood with some of the most talented athletes in the world. It doesn't take much for that to turn into a sleepwalk disaster, really. So. I still think they will have enough to win all 3, but it wouldn't be remotely surprising if it ended up with a 2-1.
I worry a lot about the fixtures, actually, just from up front point of view. Playing Samoa in New Zealand, massive Polynesian diaspora there, so it's going to be a big, loud crowd, and if they just pick some big units, we are going to struggle up front, and it's tough going over there and playing. I mean, it's really tough. So. You kind of think that should be a gimme, but I'm worried about it, to be honest. And the Maori, we know how good they can be. They can be absolutely exceptional.
So you're going for a 3-0
I'm worried about
series defeat. Bloody hell, Pete. Bloody hell.
I am.
You're meant to be the optimist here.
I'm worried, lads.
You're worried, God. Yeah.
So we finally made it to the end of the domestic season. How do you guys reflect on Edinburgh and Glasgow and how they've done? And, you obviously were in a press conference with Franco at the end of the Glasgow game. Talk us through that and, your reflections on both teams. This year.
Let's do the press conference. It was totes a mosh, I think is what the kids say. Totes a mosh. The Franco came in and he spoke at the top table, and he said there's been tears shed in the changing rooms, which is the kind of stuff they always say. We're very disappointed, it's been a tough season, and he kind of went back to his usual themes about Glasgow defending the title, targets on their back. He's very proud of it. But it got more interesting was when the travelling press. We went for a little huddle around the back of the press room, and at one point, I think it was Mark asked. It wasn't even a difficult question, was it?
It was my fault, was it?
I can't remember who it was, but it wasn't even fairness. It was just again about reflections, and he cracked, and he had to it was quite an awkward couple of 30 seconds. He had to kind of compose himself, and very un-Franco-like. Although un-Franco-like from the first 18 months of his time here, the last 6 months he's been a slightly more kind of, don't want to use the word erratic, but kind of up and down character, a bit more emotional. And so it's just interesting. I think it's been a tough season for Glasgow, and I think it's been tough for Franco. I think he's done a great job there and achieved a lot, but I think he's feeling a wee bit exasperated. And I'd be interested. What's your thoughts on it, Mark? What was your takeaway?
It's really interesting because I like what you say there. I thought, we know he's a bad loser, and that's a good thing having somebody in his position. But we've seen it before when he comes in after a defeat, and he's all over the place. He's taking pot shots at people. But I thought even allowing for the emotion of the whole journey coming to an end, the title defence, I thought it was very odd, the whole thing, and I think he was definitely trying to make a point. I'm just not sure quite what the point was. I've been thinking about it since, and he clearly is exasperated. It sounded to me like a man at the end of his tether who feels like he hasn't been supported on the back of winning, silverware last year. That to go back to this vexed issue of the non-Scottish qualified players, where it doesn't seem to be quite as black and white as he's portraying it, but he clearly feels aggrieved that he hasn't been able to keep hold of Henko Venter or Seb Cansueri, etc. But and then talking about the squad size being reduced next year, that they won't have guys to plug the gaps during the Six Nations when he loses all his internationals, all the rest of it. But equally, was he just trying to, was he genuinely threatening to walk, or was he sort of, almost putting that out there as a possibility to try and force the SRU to show their hand a bit? And what is the plan from him? Are they going to give him the Scotland job next year? Do they see him as a long-term part of this whole mix in whatever capacity? It felt to me that there was something kind of tactical going on there from him, but I'm just not quite sure what it was at this point. But when he was then asked kind of point blank, can you guarantee you're back at Scotland for the start of pre-season? He did prevaricate. I need to go away and think about this. So, and there was an odd answer when we were asking about, the different dynamic of between trying to retain a title and win it back. He said, that'll be for whoever's working with them next year or something. It was just a kind of, there were so many opportunities where he himself introduced doubt that it left a kind of quite a weird impression on me, I must say. Yeah. Never mind the tears, which was just incredibly awkward already.
But I think from the outside looking in, quite often people look at it and they go, is this a press story? These guys looking for a line, and this whole Franco future, the Franco future thing started because he was kind of linked to Wales. But but certainly that's been. I don't think we are perfectly capable of kind of jumping on not a bandwagon, but jumping on a sliver of a story and or pulling a string and seeing where it goes. But I think Franco's kept on bringing it back around to he's it's not been driven by the press, I would say, on this occasion.
And also particularly as I say, the whole the hill that he may wish to die on this around Henko Venter. He keeps going back to that time and time and time again, unprompted. It was him who introduced it in the first place, that there was apparently this new policy and he clearly wasn't happy with. And even though that Murrayfield have tried to sort of make the case that it's actually done on a case-by-case basis, there's no kind of blanket policy, he then goes back again, despite there having been sort of unrest about it last midweek. To me, that was quite revealing that he was prepared to sort of have another pop.
It's wild for a guy of that age. And yes, he's been brilliant last year. He's massively exceeded all expectations, because everyone, when he signed, were like, who the fuck is this guy? And he's going to Pro D2 next year.
Henko.
Yeah, it's Henko, sorry. And I'm like, I'm talking about Henko, sorry. And is he going to tear it up in Pro D2 next year? The fact that there's such a huge thing, he's not like a 27-year-old. just missing out in the Springboks or as a Springbok. Like,
it's quite funny.
Sorry, but the point we kept coming back to when debating this was like, when everybody's fit, Franco doesn't pick him. That's the bottom line. So, I will. There was naturally a lot of scepticism about his arrival as a 32-year-old sort of journeyman South African, but I think he has delivered excellently.
He's been brilliant. He has been brilliant.
That cameo off the bench in the final was key to them closing it out for me last year. But he, equally, it's a position where, as we've just been talking about, there are so many players coming through in Scotland. There has to, from my perspective, there's got to be somebody that's taken a bigger picture view of all this than just what do the pro teams feel they need to get them through the next 5 minutes. There's got to be a succession plan, a depth chart, and the rest of it. And to me, that Henko Venter is an example of it in action. That yes, it's against what Franco feels he would ideally like to do for next season, but it's not as if he's then staring at a bare cupboard, I would say, in those positions. Albeit, I think Jack Mann was supposed to be the next Henko Venter and is also leaving as well, so that's maybe complicated things. The one, Cancio for me, is probably the one who's been overlooked here. Because,
he's been superb.
Where are the back three players that are going to replace him necessarily? Younger guys, there's a healthy number of young back rows. There's equally moving of chess pieces that they could do with some of the Edinburgh guys that maybe need more game time as well. But fundamentally, I think there's got to be, that's what the director of rugby is supposed to be there to be doing, is looking after the longer term picture and not just saying yes to everything that the pro team coaches want.
I mean, you look at the kind of Henko Venter type players that they've got in their squad. They've re-signed Matt Fagerson. Now he should be getting re-signed ahead of Henko, age profile, Scotland, value to Scotland. You've got Ewan Ferry, who Mark just mentioned, Gregor Brown. Then you've got Rory's a different kind of player. Well, Henko's plays open side as well, but Henko, it's
Mackenzie Duncan's broken through in the last few years.
Yeah. So I don't know where Franco's coming with on that one, because it's commercial reality. The squads have to be smaller, and that means you have to have less players. And you can like it or you can't like it, but
it must be a simple fact of he is asked to have him, and they've said no.
It's funny that that is played out so publicly. Mm-hmm. I think that's quite interesting. I don't know if there's obviously a tension there. Why is it not being resolved behind closed doors?
Yeah, but there's also the issue of the agents as well. When suddenly Glasgow won the league last year, and then agents come in to renegotiate deals for this year, suddenly there's an extra, an extra knot or an extra, whatever. Everyone thinks their value has gone up because they won the league last year with Glasgow. So it just so happens that the guys that finished up this year as opposed to next year are suddenly renegotiating, and some of them have been told, no, there's no extra money for you.
Franco said that before he kind of got more anxious about the whole thing. But he talked a lot at the earlier part of the season about how the budget was staying the same. It was just that the value of the players had gone up. So that's what you're saying. Yeah,
I think the bottom line is, it's a pivotal moment though in terms of the union's relationship with him, because he is the natural, obvious succession plan for the national team, whether that's 6 months' time, a year's time, or whenever it is. He's also been a very successful club coach. Only him and Gregor have ever won a trophy with a Scottish national club team. So if that, from both a national team and a Glasgow perspective, if that was allowed to walk out the door, I think there'll be severe repercussions, and a lot of angst certainly from the Glasgow support. So they need to, whatever their plan is for him, and I'm assuming this hasn't happened up to now. Maybe it has already. Maybe he's already been told what is or isn't happening, and that's why he's acting the way he is. But I think there needs to be clarity about what is happening here, because it's not healthy for somebody to be going rogue like that on a semi-regular basis, I would suggest.
Yeah. So going back to your original question, Pete, my assessment of Glasgow's season is it's stagnated a wee bit. There's not been progress. They didn't reach the final. They didn't win it. They finished fourth last year. They finished fourth this year. Had a lot of injuries, in fairness, but I think, and then you worry because they are going to have a smaller squad next year. So I think it's been a tough season for Glasgow, is my take on it. I think you'd be a lot more optimistic about the future this time 12 months ago.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think both pro teams had kind of funny seasons. I think the first 6 months or so, or maybe up till Christmas, Glasgow had a decent season and then a falling away after Christmas, and then Edinburgh was the opposite. They started the season badly, and I've had the last couple of months Edinburgh have been hitting a wee bit of form and playing a lot more together as a team.
Yeah, so tell me your thoughts on Edinburgh then.
The Edinburgh one's fascinating because it was a zebra, wasn't it? They had they were up and down and just really inconsistent. And even the game, like they tended to play really, really badly and then raise their game and win gritty wins. It wasn't necessarily, they still weren't clicking. And then they had that zebra disaster during the Six Nations. And like at that point, you're thinking, Sean Everett's got to go. This thing's an absolute basket case. And since then, they've roused themselves. They've not won all their games, but I think they've been excellent the second half of the season. And it looks to me like just a group of guys that are sick of being written off as having a soft underbelly and the great underachievers, and they wanted to do it for themselves. But I think you have to give Sean, and I think it's the players that are driven that. But then you have to give the coaches credit, because if they've facilitated that, if they, it doesn't matter how they create the environment as long as the environment's there for them to make improvements. And I would say they were, I think the Edinburgh fans are slightly more comfortable about the trajectory of their team than Glasgow fans at the moment, I would say.
Well, again, until you start to look next year in the squad composition, I think there's a lot of, potentially a lot of pain ahead for both of them next year with reduced sizes, the age profile, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's gone right down. A lot of experience has gone out the door and the associated expense with, the replacements are young up and coming guys who may well turn out to be just as good in the long run, but it's a big ask for that to sort of coalesce first straight up, and I think with Edinburgh, I would be careful. I totally agree with Ben. I think that there's been a definite gear change there, and some of even performances in defeat to Sharks and whatnot were really impressive and gritty. But I wouldn't want to overstate it, because I think for that squad to limp into the playoffs on the final day is that is absolute bare minimum territory for me, is where they should be. And then yet again they show against the Bulls what the toughest, pretty much apart from Leinster away, the toughest semi-final they could have got, and they were bossing it and let slip that position. So they've still got this kind of weird schizophrenic tendency where they're so up and down, even within the course of individual games. But I think Jamie will be a huge miss. I think his kind of force of personality, as much as his ability, has driven a lot of that recent stuff. But again, somebody like Magnus Bradbury has been key to it as well. So hopefully he can sort of take on even more of that responsibility next year and push them up. Because the squad as it stands now, maybe not necessarily the day one of next season, but that should be not a scraping a top 8 squad. That should be really knocking on the door of top 4 for me.
Yeah. And I think there's a problem if they're not next season. Then you have to say, I just think Edinburgh seem to have recruited more and better than Glasgow have so far. Like they've lost Dave Cherry, who is a great set piece, a great Six Nations, great set piece hooker. But they've brought in Dylan Richardson. That's Jamie Ritchie's pretty irreplaceable. I suppose they'll be hoping Luke Crosby plays a bit more next season. And what have you? They've got a lot of, and they've signed a lot of young guys, brought a lot of young guys into the squad, the Tom Currys and all these guys. And Glasgow, it just seems to, I think there might be a few announcements coming. We're all waiting with bated breath for the Dan Lancaster one. But I think Edinburgh just seem to have a bit of momentum, and I think Glasgow are just floating a wee bit.
This is probably a whole podcast on its own, but David Nucifor's to-do list over the next season when he comes back from the Lions, is this something we can sum up in a few minutes, or should we reserve this for another pod?
I've got the school run in 10 minutes.
We'll come back to it. I mean, it is actually, I think it's too big a subject. So let's wrap this up then. Let's do some quick fire bits and pieces. Obviously, the biggest piece of news in the last week or so since Glasgow, apart from Glasgow going out, is obviously Xander Fagerson having to withdraw from the Lions tour, which is devastating for him. I mean, there's not much more to be said about that, apart from it's going to affect the Lions very, very badly. They've got not great depth, and there's an injury cloud over Tadhg Furlong. And when Barney and I were picking our squads, I certainly thought Finlay Bealham should have been in there as a fourth tight head, but they're really starting to scrape the barrel now with tight heads. Not much more to come.
Just as well, the Aussies can't scrum.
Yeah.
Well, Angus Bell's pretty good. He could do some damage if they're starting to get a bit creaky there.
Yeah. You do. I mean, Glasgow maintained to us by 2 or 3 times a week that Xander was absolutely on track. Everything was fine. So you then start to worry, Hugh Jones, I know he's
Yeah.
travelled to Dublin and Portugal this week, but,
Did they not say it was a new injury for Zander?
My understanding, it's not the same one that he was injured. He picked up something new.
No, so he's got it's his Achilles, isn't it? And it's basically, Franco spoke about it. He's going to be dealing with it for the rest of his career.
No, that's Hugh Jones. Sorry, yeah, but
Oh.
the Zander one is apparently a new injury.
Oh, is it right?
They haven't specified what it is, but it apparently is a different one to the calf, and he was looking like he was coming right for the calf.
All right, I didn't know that. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we'll come back. We'll get into the Lions stuff in a few weeks once we've had a break. So we won't touch on that too much. Barney, do you want to, just for time's sake, we'll just go to one at a time for each of you for these questions. Barney, do you want to give us a précis on the women's game this season?
Well, are we doing awards? No.
Well, you can do awards. Is that how you want to do it?
No, not really.
Do you want to do
That was the original plan, but we don't have time. We're going to do game of the season, player of the season. I'm telling everybody what they're not getting now. So
what would you like? What would you like to do, Barney?
We could do quickly. Let's do quickly, but we'll go through each one. Game. Has everyone done their homework? Or we'll just
wing it. Go for it, Barney. Do the
right.
awards.
Game of the season. My game of the season was Edinburgh versus Sale Sharks. Even though Edinburgh lost, I totally loved it. It was like a pantomime. It was like Sam Skinner tried to have a fight with Eben Etzebeth. Well, we didn't try to have a fight, but stand up to Eben Etzebeth.
You mean Natal Sharks, not Sale Sharks?
Did I say Sale Sharks? Sorry, Natal Shark. Well, not Natal Shark. What are they called? Vodafone Sharks, or whatever they're called.
Yeah, Hollywood Bet Sharks.
Hollywood Bet. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I just really enjoyed it because it was a right good laugh, to be honest with you. and like big names at the Hive Stadium. The atmosphere was jumping, and it's not always been the case. Edinburgh lost, which was a wee bit of a downer, but I really enjoyed that. Anyone else?
I was going to go for Glasgow Leicester, the Champions Cup that had been round of 16. The week before the Aviva disaster, but the part 712. But I just thought it was I think we'd all been down at the time when they'd cuffed them at Welford Road under Dave Rennie. And also that was still Gregor at that point. It was just before the swap. But I thought it was a very kind of similar vibe. It could easily have ended up that kind of scoreline again. Glasgow just at their attacking best, and probably one of the few occasions this year where it all really came together in a big match for them on both sides of the ball. And we got some classic Michael Checker ref bashing afterwards as well. So it was never a game goes by without that. But you've then, in fairness, seen the quality of that Leicester team, and they've reached a Premiership final. So I think that was a real, probably the highlight of the Glasgow season as well.
Watson?
Yeah, I picked another loss, the same as you, Barney, but I went for Scotland-France. That was my favourite game of the year. I think we'd all thought that we were going to Paris to get absolutely battered, and the fact that we were, 16-13 at half-time or something like that, we were competitive most of the way through the game, and then just the whole atmosphere of the French winning the Six Nations at home, and the carnival atmosphere. Just absolutely loved that day.
Yeah, so just jumping in on that, going back to our conversation at the very beginning, that's what we're talking about, like that whole occasion, the kind of, remember the girl was lifted up on the stage in the middle of the stadium and sang, do you remember before they were singing before the start of the thing? But do you remember she was on this, and it lifted her right up in the middle of the stadium, and she sang, she was like 100 feet up in the middle. Anyway, but the whole thing, like the fireworks display, you must have been, you should have had those pints before the game. Anyway, I'm going to find a YouTube clip and make sure Burnsy puts that in the notes. Yeah, but it was a great atmosphere at the stadium, and that's what we're talking about. Going back to the beginning is like that's what we're looking for. Great rugby occasions with the bells and whistles added on the side. Yeah, and the bells and whistles added on the side, not these. Yeah, anyway, but we're repeating ourselves. Player of the season.
Player of the season.
Right, do you want me to go first again?
Yeah.
Right, men's player of the season. I'm going to be typical Barnes, offside line-ish about it, and it's because my mate Fred Stevenson from Hoyk was saying he likes the podcast, but he gets annoyed when we just talk about the pro and the international game and we don't talk about the club game. So I thought I'd go for a club player because he's been immense as the dominant team in the Premiership. It was Jamie Shedden, who plays for Ayr, who's just like I've said it before, how that guy, he came through Kilmarnock, and he says himself he was a big skinny guy and he filled out later in life, but part of the filling out was that he kind of went to Marne, then went to Ayr Bulls, and he got in a proper weights programme, and you just look at that guy and think he's got the profile of a pro rugby player. We're still not cracked it if we're letting guys like that slip through the net somewhere here. He was the top voted player when we did the poll for Premiership Team of the Week. Team of the season, sorry. So I'm going to go for Jamie Shedden, and that was because my mate from Hoyk said you should do more club stuff, and I thought, right, I'll take that on board, and I'll pick an air guy to really annoy you, because I'm sure you think I should pick it. Anyone else?
I'm going to stick with the pro ranks, and I was torn between maybe slightly counterintuitive given what I was saying about Edinburgh, but I've gone between two of them. I thought Wes Houston again was outstanding, and particularly in that first portion of the season when they were very, very erratic at best. I thought he was outstanding, and again somebody who will eventually no doubt see in Scotland colours as well. But I'm going to go over and above. I'm going to go for Jamie Ritchie, because I think
that's mine.
Oh, there you go. I've gotten ahead of you, but I think both in terms of performances, but the sheer kind of character that man has shown in the last 18 months. He's been in and out of the Scotland team. He's had captaincy taken off him both international and club arena, but has never allowed the standards to drop. And you can see a guy who really drives the best out of those around him as well. And good luck to him on it will hopefully be still a top flight adventure in France. But I think it's such a wonderful opportunity for him and his family. And no doubt he'll thrive there and still be coming back to contribute to the national team. So fine work, Jamie.
Mm-hmm. No, totally agree.
I'm sticking with the Edinburgh theme, and I went for Darcy Graham. I had thought about Sione, but obviously he had injuries and missed a lot of the season. I think when he has played, Sione's been just world class.
He just hasn't had a quiet or bad game when he's been fit. It's been unbelievable.
Yeah, but I went for Darcy. I think he's had a phenomenal season. I think he's really unlucky to miss out in the Lions. But I think if you look at his stats, one of the ones that when I was doing my homework, he's second in the URC list with clean breaks, but he's also second for Edinburgh for turnovers for the season. So he's doing everything, both sides of the ball. He's running meters, everything. He's a guy that goes looking for it every week. He doesn't seem to have an off switch when he pulls on those boots.
Very good.
You want to reiterate your Jamie Ritchie, or you just echoing everything?
No. I think Mark covered it, and he just has been superb. And especially with the change in the laws, he's been so good at that aerial game and winning the ball back for Scotland. He's been superb. Mark's got to shoot, so we should probably call it there, lads. We're going to have a break for a few weeks, and then we'll be back. We'll be going into the Scotland tour and also obviously the Lions. Gents, it's been a long but a brilliant season and a real pleasure doing it with you guys.
And it's been a long and not so brilliant pod, but yeah. Thank you very much, Pete. You've been an excellent
thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, gents.
Awesome, and we'll catch up soon.
Been a good season. We'll get up soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye. Okay, cheers, lads. Bye. And just before we go, a final thank you to our partner for today's episode, Village Health and Wellness Clubs Edinburgh. Remember, you guys can get summer ready and enjoy clubs stacked with premium kit, a brand new box and burn studio for the ultimate combat style workouts, plus spanking new bikes in the group cycling studio, all ready for action. You can gym, swim, throw shapes, and get your chill on for just £50 per month. Summer's coming. Get ready to dig out those short shorts. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll catch up with you in a few weeks.
It's the offside line.
This is not soccer. Is that clear?
Utmost danger.